All right, let's get started by digging in and talking all about the Metamorphosis Master Program. First of all, let's talk about what you're going to get. All right, you're going to get a complete 8-week conditioning program. That's what you signed up for. And that's going to include everything A to Z. That's the strength exercises, the conditioning exercises, the programming, and really everything in between that you need to improve your conditioning over the next 8 weeks. Now, there are 2 different levels to the program, and that's really based around your fitness level and your schedule, how much training you can actually do. But in both programs, both levels, it's going to be between 4 to 6 days of training per week. Now, you could scale slightly below that, maybe down to 3 to bare minimum if you're at a starting point where your fitness isn't very high. But in general, conditioning takes frequency. So you need to plan for somewhere between 4 to 6 days of training, regeneration type work per week if you really want to get the most out of this program. Now, there's also zone-based interval training in this program, which you probably have not done before unless you've been following my work and paid close attention. But this is really a way of incorporating a new style or a different way of doing interval training that is ultimately more effective and able to be more personalized to you. And I'll talk more about that as we progress through this section. Now, there's also going to be an assessment that's going to include basic exercises to see where you're at in terms of your conditioning. And we'll do that at the start, we'll do that halfway in between, and we'll do that at the end of the program so you can track your progress. Because again, ultimately, to me, results are what we're going after here. We want your conditioning to improve over the next 8 weeks. And in order to make sure it happens, we're going to assess and test along the way to make sure that you are actually improving. Because if you're not, we want to know ahead of time to make adjustments as we go. Now, the second piece of the whole thing here, the class, the master class and the master program is about teaching you how conditioning works, why it's so important, what the major pieces are, how everything you do outside the training, the recovery plays a big role in your results, and really everything in between. So there's 15 lessons covering all that. There's Conditioning 101 that is going to dive into what conditioning is, why it's important, how it works, the major pieces, all that kind of stuff. There's going to be a section on recovery and how, again, everything you do outside of the workout, outside the gym, drives the results you're getting from that. And then there's going to be a program breakdown so you can understand why I built the program the way that I did. Now, in general, there's 2 different types of people that have signed up for my program like this in the past. One is the coach who really wanted to see how I build programs and then use that information to train their clients, the people they work with more effectively. And then 2 are the people who are fairly serious about training and ultimately just want to learn how to have a more scientific based approach to improving their conditioning. So if you fall into either one of those or another category, the whole point of this master program is to give you the program and the master class knowledge that you need to progress beyond just very simplistic programs that ultimately don't produce long-term results. So by the end of this program, not only is your conditioning going to be better, but your knowledge, your skills, your awareness, and your overall understanding of conditioning is going to be much better as well. And that is my goal for you. Now, when it comes back to the levels here, like I mentioned, there are 2 different levels. The first level is course level 1, and that is going to include roughly 3 to 5 days of training per week, along with some recovery regen as part of that. 1 day per week of high intensity, and this is really appropriate for someone who's a beginner to an intermediate. So in other words, if you haven't been doing a whole lot of conditioning or you do it sporadically and you know you need to get better, but you're not ready to jump into level 2, this is really the best place to start. And you can always go up a level as necessary, or you can come back down if you need to. But as we talk about the assessment here in the next lesson, it'll also help you decide which one is more appropriate for you. Now, level 2 is going to include a bit more training here. So this is 4 to 6 days per week plus recovery regen. And there's going to be 2 days of high intensity, which is really necessary if you're already starting with a foundation of fitness and you need to improve your conditioning even higher. So again, I'll talk more about what these programs entail, but there are these 2 levels that allow you to pick which one's most appropriate for you. And of course, if you start with level 1, you improve your conditioning through level 1. By the time you're done with that, you'd be ready for level 2 and beyond. So either way, they're going to help you get better. Now, both levels are built on what I call the train, recover, repeat model. And that is built around this concept of using different levels of volume and intensity, which is just a very traditionalized way of breaking your program up into different levels of stress across the training week. Now, I use different names than most people. I use what I call blue day or rebound, green or stimulation, or red and development. So these serve different purposes. Okay, the blue days are more for recovery. The green days are more for stimulation, and the red days are your high intensity, hardest training sessions. And there are different things that are going to occur in each type of those workouts and in different levels of volume and intensity, as you can see here. So on your blue recovery regen days, we're keeping your heart rate and your overall intensities, more like 70 to 85%. It shouldn't feel super hard. We jump up into the moderate category more at the green, around 80, 90%, and then the red is the 85 to 100%. So again, we're scaling intensity as we go up this spectrum, and therefore there's going to be different types of exercise. They're going to be more or less appropriate in different methods, and each is going to incorporate, or require, I should say, a different amount of recovery accordingly. So again, I'll dive into the stuff as I get into the program breakdown, but you'll just see that either level 1 or level 2, whichever one you choose, is built around this same fundamental building blocks or principles. And once you're done with the program, if you want to continue conditioning, or you want to dive into strength or hypertrophy or power or any other area of fitness, these same basic principles will help you train in a more organized, more effective, and ultimately more long-term direction, so that you're able to achieve results week after week, month after month. And that really comes down to managing these things appropriately and effectively. Now, as I mentioned too, zone-based interval training is a big piece of this, and this is part of how we scale these intensities and how we have these different levels of day. So we have blue zone methods. This is going to be your lower intensity method, somewhere between 70 to 85% of your max heart rate. This is going to develop very specific pieces of the aerobic fitness system and ultimately your conditioning. Then we have our step up, which is our green zone method, somewhere between 80 to 90% of max heart rate. These are going to incorporate more moderate threshold muscle fibers, different areas that aren't necessarily trained in the lower intensity zones. And then our red zone highest intensity method, somewhere between 85 and 100%. And again, this is going to target all your muscle fibers, your entire cardiorespiratory system, and really put your aerobic fitness to its limits. So again, you are going to need, to get the most out of this program, at least a heart rate monitor. So if you're using Morpheus, great. Everything in this program is built around these 3 zones. It'll be very, very easy for you. And if you're not using Morpheus, you have some other heart rate tool that you like, great. But the reality is, again, you need to have some sort of heart rate monitoring system to get the most out of this program. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it. If you don't have heart rate monitor at all, you can still use the estimated time frames and rest intervals and all that to get as close as you can. But heart rate training and zone-based interval training are really 2 big pieces of dialing in the intensity and making sure your conditioning is exactly pinpointed and dialed in to you. So why do we use zone-based interval training? Well, like I said, because it's very, very effective in using these heart rate zones, which are different levels of intensity, to dial in both the work and the rest intervals throughout the program. And you'll see that's a pretty big difference in between ZBIT or zone-based interval training and traditional HIIT or high intensity training. The work intervals, in most high intensity interval training are just 100% intensity or close to it. The work intervals in zone-based interval training are going to vary from low to moderate intensity all the way up to high intensity. There's a spectrum of intensity for the work, not just one speed at 100%. And then most of the work interval, or the rest intervals, I should say, in traditional HIIT are passive. So you just sit there. You just wait till your next period's up to go hard again. But you'll find that the passive, or the rest intervals in Morpheus and zone-based interval training, are going to be mostly active. In other words, you're going to continue moving. And there are a lot of benefits for that, because your body was designed to move, and it actually recovers faster during an active recovery period than a passive recovery period. So we'll talk more about this when we get into methods, but just a big picture here of what zone-based interval training is going to look like relative to what you might be used to. Now, the other thing here is, because they allow me to dial in the intensity, they also allow for progression for long-term development, long-term results. So even though the program is only 8 weeks, my goal is to set you up for success for the long term. And that means teaching you how to incorporate interval training and steady state, everything really in between, in a way that allows you to continually progress and overload your body without overstressing to the point that you're under-recovered and overtrained. And the other thing is, you can train in different ways with these methods to hit all 3 of the different energy systems, and you can hit different components of them. So as we dive into masterclass, we talk about energy systems, we talk more about the methods, the program breakdown. This will make a lot more sense to you. But again, the whole point is just to understand that the zone-based interval training is going to make up a big foundational piece of how you're going to do the conditioning methods throughout this program. So if you have a heart rate monitor, or if you have Morpheus, great. You're going to get a ton of use out of it. It's going to be extremely effective for you. If you don't, I highly recommend either getting Morpheus to plug in the exact heart rate zones or any other sort of heart rate strap, so you can at least monitor where your heart rate's at, because again, you're going to get more of the programming if you do that. Now, if you look at the programs here, like I mentioned, there are 2 levels. So level 1 is built on what I call 1, 2, 3. So 1 high intensity, 2 moderate intensity, 3 low intensity recovery type sessions. So you can see day 6 is optional, and it does give you some flexibility here later in the program. Here I'll talk about ways to adjust this based on your schedule. But again, if you were a beginner or lower level intermediate, this is a really good place to start. You don't need to go into the gym every day and smash yourself with high intensity. That doesn't work, and I'm guessing you figure that out, or you probably wouldn't have invested in this program to learn how to do it more effectively. But in general, the level 1 program, as you can see, it is going to be a mixture, as will level 2, of these different levels of intensity, and it's going to help balance the training with the recovery across the week, which is a huge key to seeing continual and lasting results over time. Now, level 2 here, you're going to see this is what I call a 2-2-2 framework. So 2 high intensity, 2 low intensity, 2 moderate intensity. And you can see there's a very clear pattern here of a moderate high recovery or low intensity back to back. And this is built around what I call the stress recovery process or stress recovery cycle, which again, I'll talk more about as we get through the masterclass. But whichever one you choose, again, it's based on this concept of building our training days around these different levels of intensity and facilitating recovery as part of that. And again, this is really the key to achieving long-term lasting success, whether it's conditioning, strength, or anything else. And in my experience, this is a big part of what's missing in so many conditioning programs. People think that conditioning is just go as hard as you can. It's just high intensity, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. Ultimately, your body just does not respond well to that for very long before it starts to hit plateaus and ultimately breaks down. So this approach, again, whether you continue on with conditioning after the 8 weeks or you decide to switch gears and go a different direction with your fitness, this will help you no matter what your goal is. And it's going to help, again, you just find that right balance between the stress of training, the stress of life, and the recovery from both, so that your body gets what it needs and it keeps improving over time. Now, last, of course, but not least, as I mentioned, this is a master program, which means you get a master class as part of that. So I'm going to dive into a lot of different areas of conditioning, understanding energy systems, the M3 model of movement, metabolic systems, and mental performance. We're going to talk about recovery and how that works and all the different pieces of that. And we'll get a program breakdown where I'll dive into all the ins and outs and specifics of how and why I built the training piece of this program the way that I did. And so if you're a coach, I think you'll find it's incredibly valuable to help you go through your own thought processes as you write conditioning programs for other people. And the reality is, if you're not a coach, you're still training yourself, right? So whether you're following my program or maybe you're someone else's, or you're learning how to do it yourself, learning the ins and outs, again, the same things that the coaches need to know are going to be valuable for you to know, because life is more than 8 weeks, and after this program's over, you're going to keep going. So the big goal here for me, like I said, is not only for you to improve your conditioning over the next 8 weeks, but it's to also improve your knowledge, your skills, and your overall ability to continue down your fitness path wherever that may take you in a more effective way that leads to better results over time. So that wraps this section up. In the next lesson, I'm talking more about the conditioning assessment and what you're going to need to get started, setting yourself up for success with the next 8 weeks in following the conditioning program.